To go. So Danielle, when you're ready, if you just want to pick up on the brief intro, and we'll let Sally into the room.
Yep, no worries. So our second finalist today is Sally Elstub. Sally's enthusiastic about developing high performance and inclusive teams by creating a collaborative environment and nurturing individuals to achieve their outstanding results. Sally is an FMCG consultant with IRI worldwide and will be talking to us today about health and wellness trends.
Hi, I'm Sally, and it's my real pleasure to be here today to share with you my knowledge about the intersection of mental health and food. I love taking disparate data sets, mashing them together, overlaying what I consider to be common sense to solve problems, spot trends, and also the potential ramifications. I see this as being really advantageous in my role as consultant for IRI, and I get to put these skills into the test every single day. I've never been one that is content with the status quo. I love a challenge. And one of my favorite sayings is, nothing worth doing is ever easy. I saw the Joe Berry Award as an avenue to challenge myself and affect change, specifically in an area that I'm really passionate about, mental health. I lost a close friend to suicide last year in the first few weeks of lockdown. After the initial shock, my footy mates and I decided to get together and raise money for Headspace. To do this, we participated in the push-up challenge. We had to complete a combined total of 3,046 push-ups across 25 days. Each push-up represented one life lost to suicide in the prior year. So I implore you to please listen to me today, because I'm here to deliver a wake-up call about the implications of consumer habits and diet. And as an industry, I think I can show you the evidence that I have found a sweet spot combining doing good with doing well. This sweet spot will unlock $1.6 billion in mental illness. This goes across all age cohorts, religions, and ethnicities. So there is a relevant market for you in here. My research has also uncovered 3 core emerging needs arising out of the socio and political environments that we sit within. One of that is within sharing, about reconfiguring health foods away from being a me occasion to being a shared we occasion. And I've got a few tactics beneath each of these. And also, how do we extend comfort food for those guilt-free occasions by ensuring that health food plays a role there too. So for you today, I've put together a very well-researched, credible and practical deck for how to capture share in the growing health and wellness market. Today, I'm going to show you and start out with a warning message about the convergence of macro, socio and environmental factors which are propelling health and what consumers are seeking, and identifying 2 core occasions that the mental health endemic has given rise to. I'll outline a really clear strategy to win, regardless if you're a brand owner or a retailer. And this is particularly relating to those emerging need states. And I'll conclude with the first steps you can take when you leave the room today to ensure that we are activating against the next biggest threat to Australia, which is the rise in mental health and illness. To frame up my thesis, in 2021 and before, we've seen the growing emergence of mental illness in adults across the country. I believe that in Australia, our single biggest health threat across the next decade is going to be mental illness. We know that suicide is the leading cause of death for Australians between 15 and 44 years old. So to frame up my thesis, in 2021, I believe the single biggest threat to Australia across the next decade is going to be the increase in mental illness. We've seen just across 2020 with the COVID restrictions, lockdowns and uncertainty that the prevalence of mental illness within Australia and other developed nations has skyrocketed. And what I thought was really interesting is when we look at the other rich developed nations, so on the right-hand side, the dark blue indicates rich nations with high GDP per capita. I can see that we are facing dual health crises, not only the mental impacts, but also physical impacts through the increase in obesity across the developed nations. And we know that this is often seen to be linked with diet. And we also have found links between depression and poor diet as well. In the last 15 years, obesity within Australia has risen by 10% to 29% of Australians. So based on this, we know that Australia is battling both these high health crises. It's going to thrust mental illness into the limelight. And what role do we think that CPG should play? So when we look to define wellness, it's often described as the active pursuit of activities, choices, and lifestyles that lead to a state of holistic health. And these six aspects play a key role. When I look at what role CPG can play within these six, I argue that 4 of them are covered off dramatically. We look to social, such as sharing and entertaining occasions. We get emotional support by sharing food across key occasions like birthdays, Christmases, and other key religious periods. Of course, physically, food feeds us and gives us the nutrients that we need to perform. But I think at the moment, the most underdeveloped area is within the mental aspect. And when we think about how societies are expecting big businesses to step up and serve the communities in which they do business, we've seen that the Enderman Trust Barometer Survey, which is a survey looking at trust across the last 20 years, has increasingly found that people are now considering and expect CEOs to publicly speak out on societal challenges, with over 2/3 of people expecting that CEOs should step in when governments do not fix social change. Across the year, just to share the magnitude, 1 in 5 Aussies will suffer from a form of mental illness. 1 in 4 Aussies feel lonely. And lonely Australians have worse physical and mental impacts. And we've also seen that there is links drawn between depressive states and poor diets. So I've talked about already the growing emergence of both the crises, health and physical. But today I want to show you the groundswell of other things that we're seeing. So once again, in relation to declining health, not only mental, but also physical. But we're also seeing within the industry, poor habits. And this actually comes out of the paradox of choice that we have in Australia. We're really lucky. We can decide to order food in, go out for takeaway, restrictions permitting. We can reheat from scratch, or we can cook something that we found on Instagram. We also have the affordability question as well. With droughts, floods, fires, and the mouse plague, what we've seen is we've seen fresh fruit and vegetables increase in terms of CPI cost. So this is putting pressure on families' baskets when they're having to choose between affordably feeding their family and feeding their family. And we're also seeing a lack of education, which drives poor habits as well. From a government perspective, in relation to the mental health endemic that we are seeing, we've seen action being taken. In the last budget, they announced $2.3 billion to increase the access and affordability of mental health services within Australia. And we've also seen an adoption of a range of recommendations done out of the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system. We also need to ensure that we have policies around how we track and measure mental health within Australia in the market. When we think about the governance on food packaging, we know that there's a raft of things that the government does ensure that we can claim as benefits on pack. We have the nutritional panel on the back of pack, which is enforced to be there. And we also have the 5-star and 4-star health ratings as well. In relation to the growing social interest, I'd love to call out the fact that we are seeing the removal of stigma around mental health. And this has been a generational shift and will continue into the future. This means marketing specifically to people who are suffering from mental illness is no longer going to be met with people backing away. People are going to start embracing this into the future. We've also seen the rise of other social movements, which has propelled this along, like Me Too, Black Lives Matter, etc. And what we've seen with this is the impact that individuals can play within sharing on social media for these big social movements to actually enact change. Of course, social media is also having a crushing effect on ourselves as well, doubling down into the impact of mental health as well. Seeing dramatic videos of the death of George Floyd, for example. We've also seen blurring of boundaries within the industry around what is considered as health foods. Think about the salty snacks aisle, the ice cream aisle, and the convergence of factors there where people are now going down that aisle and finding both health branded foods as well as the traditional foods as well. So that's how I see the world. And this is how I see health foods. Traditionally, and within many scientific studies, health food is characterized as being unprocessed or minimally processed. But I argue that this concept misses the mark and is outdated in terms of the way that consumers are seeking and finding health foods now. We need to consider the way that we create value through the production chain. And I think it's exciting to see brands like Koya out of the US, which are overlaying a whole heap of health trends, such as plant-based, high protein, low sugar, keto friendly, to throw an umbrella around all these different health themes to attract shoppers in. There is no one arguing that this is not positioned as a health brand, but I can say it is heavily processed. So therefore doesn't fit the outdated perspective that health foods must be minimally processed. I propose a new perspective, and this is a diagram that I have prepared in the way that I think health foods need to be considered into the future. Across two categories, fortified and enriched, and avoidance and moderation. We see a whole heap of macro health themes that fall underneath these. I'm not talking about fads that are here 1 month, gone the next. I'm talking about enduring themes such as functional foods, superfoods, which have been across all mankind. So we know that 5,000 years ago, early humans were drinking cocoa drinks to give themselves energy and boost. This is not a new concept. When we look at avoidance and moderation, we've seen the proliferation of plant-based foods, moving out of the chilled aisle into ambient and also frozen, as people are seeking to moderate or avoid and reduce their intake of meats. We've seen the latest generation growing up with more allergies. So we've seen the rise of free from as well, expanding ranges across a whole heap of categories. We are always going to have those diet aligned products, which have the stamp of veganism or keto friendly. And this acts as a way for consumers to feel that they are definitely buying a product that aligns to what they're seeking. And of course, the avoidance and minimalization of the familiar enemies like salt, sugar, and fat, which has been an enduring trend. Lastly, I offer two emerging occasions that brands and retailers can tap into through these themes. These are connection occasions and personal guilt-free occasions, which gives current attention to the mental health pandemic that we are having. And I argue that if you think about these in terms of the structures from fortified and enriched and avoidance and moderation, that these two new occasions play very nicely into the identified themes. And did you know that individuals with adequate social relationships have the 50% greater likelihood of survival? This is comparable to a scale of quitting smoking. So no wonder I am passionate about connection occasions, especially across the uncertain times that we're having at the moment. And this lends nicely to the concept of sharing, entertaining, gifting foods. From a personal and guilt-free occasion perspective, we need to consider that people are looking for healthy alternatives within comfort food and also reward foods as well, without that guilt burden that you typically get after indulging and gorging on foods that are traditionally unhealthy for you. Within the sharing occasion, I argue that we need to reconfigure healthy foods away from purely being about me to being a we occasion. So a few ways to do this is we need to ensure that we can build habits with consumers. Coles Health in Every Aisle is a great example of this. When I walk down the cereals aisle, I won't only see products that I've traditionally seen, but I'll also see the gluten-free and other health-related to select from, expanding my consideration set. We need to ensure that health foods can play a key role in key selling periods. If we think about gondola rams across footy finals, Christmas, we see it proliferated with salty snacks, biscuits, and confectionery. We need to challenge both research and design, and also the economic effect of having health foods in those highlighted areas. And why can't health foods play the same role? And lastly, we need to reconfigure and innovate pack format when it comes to health foods. When we look across the range of other categories, we see where this innovation is playing a role through party size, sharing packs, family packs, and gifting. And this is just one example of a way that we can move from having health foods being about something that I do to something that I share with others to help many. We know that diet and depressive symptoms are linked, so offering health across more occasions is going to help the masses. When we look about comfort food, we can see that extending comfort food to include health food is going to have natural benefits. We need to ensure we do this through stealing cues from other comfort foods. So traditionally, when women think about comfort food, we typically think about foods that are high in sugar. And we found that when men think about comfort food, they think foods that are high in carbs and also, think bangers and mash. We need to take these cues from comfort, like chili to give that warm mouth feel, for example, or warmth by heating up something with oats to release that beautiful smell, to ensure that we can steal and borrow these cues from comfort and put them into health foods. We need to create rituals. If we think of a tobacco smoker who rolls their own cigarettes, the ritual and anticipation they're getting ahead of smoking that cigarette. When I make my coffee in the morning, it's grinding the beans, extracting the coffee shot. It's about this ritual that really gives me that sense of comfort. We need to increasingly create health foods that can play to these rituals. And we also need to focus on feel. Now, I'm not just considering feel as being what you actually put in your mouth. So for example, innovating texture and flavor to ensure that people are feeling moreish, like we do within the snack food category. But we also need that full feeling, like adding protein to give people that feeling of being full afterwards. But also that feeling of anticipated afterglow, that feel-good factor that you get when you have health foods. We need to highlight these benefits. A great example from another category we think of is Red Bull. Vitalizes the body and mind. The message that Red Bull can give you wings talks a lot to that feel and anticipated afterglow. Within health food specifically, we've seen Healtheries innovate a super crunchy, healthy product. This is going to be moreish for the small consumers. Now going within healthy reward, and how do we ensure that we can provide health as a pillar of permissibility? Firstly and foremost, we need to satisfy on taste. Overwhelmingly, when we look at products that are targeted towards health related, we see that they over-index in utilitarian benefits compared to other snacking foods that highlight tastiness. we still know consumers are seeking out flavour and taste as the number one most important thing. So we need to ensure that we can satisfy our taste. We need to also invoke emotions as well. And now this means that when we do promotions and advertising, that we tap into the same feeling that you get when you see a Macca's ad. And I think Halo Top does a great job of this. And we also need to consider, how do we create health food for the masses? By making it a permissible indulgence. A drizzle of dark chocolate, for example, is something that might tip someone over the edge of moving into this health food avenue. As I've said, nothing worth doing is ever easy. I've shared the escalating impacts of mental illness on Australians and the social and political movements towards remedying this. I identified 2 occasions rising from this context: connection and guilt-free, and the consumers that are going to be seeking more of this into the future. I've challenged the paradigm of what is considered to be health foods to show how processed foods should be a part of this. And I've gone a step further to relate the avoidance and moderation and functional and enriched with those guilt-free and sharing and connection occasions. I've finished with a collection of tactics to activate upon these occasions. But we know nothing worth doing is ever easy. And I've touched on a number of topics here and concepts which are new. If you hear the alarm bells ringing too, I urge you to consider doing these 3 things when you leave the room today. We need to figure out a way to activate health foods across key selling periods, to play a primary supporting role in these times. We need to ensure that we have an innovation pipeline to move foods away from being a me occasion to a sharing and gifting occasion. And also we need to ensure that we are highlighting the hedonic values and benefits of these health foods and not just focusing purely on what they do for us. This is the sweet spot between doing good and doing well, and can unlock $1.6 billion within the snacking market alone. But also, in the meantime, support the 4.8 million Australians struggling with mental illness. I challenge you that you can capitalize on this opportunity, because hard things are not put in our way to stop us, but to challenge us to find opportunities. Thank you.
Well done. Thanks, Sally. Really good job. And don't at all fret about the interruption. It flowed perfectly well and you didn't miss a beat. So well done.
Thank you.
I do think the numbers that you put up from the point of view of mental health were startling, absolutely startling. So quite scary when you think about it. So a really relevant topic and well presented. So thank you. And we're going to move now to questions specifically on your paper. And I'd invite Michelle to ask the first question.
Sure.
Hi, Sally. Thanks for taking the time to really highlight what is a really important issue in Australia, and in my view as well, doesn't have anywhere near the attention that it deserves. So I really credit you for doing that on mental health. My question is more related to the practicality of what you just shared in the supermarkets. And we know that Coles have made the decision to move their healthy breakfast cereal aisle into the main aisle. And this will really transform the way that shoppers walk into their store and buy cereals from that one location. It's quite a bold move, but it's clearly a signal of where Coles are going. What do you see as the risk to Coles in making this move? And what do you see to the risk in shoppers that they may lose in taking this change?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question, Michelle. I do see it as being a very bold move, moving away from that health food aisle where me as a consumer, it's been great because I go in and I only have to go down that one single aisle and I can select from a whole heap of different categories. And now having them dispersed among the other aisles, what I think Coles will stand to gain is they're going to stand to gain those people who were seeking out health foods to now actually walk down the aisles and find other foods and products that may have been actually perfectly positioned to them that they hadn't considered in the past. I think also what Coles and society stands to gain as well is, as I've mentioned, it's increasing the consideration set of consumers who are buying breakfast cereal. So when I stand in front of the aisle now, I'll see these in my periphery and I might consider them as well. The risk is that we start to proliferate within these aisles and we start to challenge the SKU count that we can see. And when we put pressure on SKUs, the question always comes to incrementality and also how much is getting delivered from a margin perspective. With health foods, typically they are priced at a higher and a premium. I once again will challenge this as well, is why don't we have the R&D involved to ensure that we can have affordable health as well. But typically at the moment when we do see it, we see health foods are positioned at a price premium, which is great for retailers, but we do have the struggle of run rates. And I think it does come back to the fact that if we are putting pressure in these aisles on SKU count and ranging, that these health foods that have typically found a role to play in the health food aisle might get squeezed out in the short term as the momentum builds. And as we innovate and also lend the cues of other snack food aisles, for example, to better promote what the health benefits are. So I think that is the core potential ramification of moving these SKUs out. But I would argue that overall, I think it's definitely benefits.
Thanks.
Okay.
Hi, Sally. My name's Tim Rice. Congratulations on a very compelling and engaging presentation. Well done. Often we look to our governments to legislate on big issues such as health, environment, sustainability, but more often than not, the job of this is left to the private sector and big business. My question for you is, in your opinion, who's responsible for building a healthier nation, both physically and mentally, and what more can each of those parties do?
Yeah, thanks, Tim, for the question. Something I'm really passionate about, actually, so I really appreciate it. So yes, we do often look to governments, and when we ask people, just everyday citizens like you and I, about who should play this role, overwhelmingly across a whole heap of sustainable and other factors, people say governments. Next is business. And then lastly, it's us as individuals, the role that we can play. There's probably a challenge there in terms of us feeling that we can actually make a difference. But I argue that business is more and more, as I've mentioned, the Enderman Trust survey, is increasingly becoming the place where people are looking to, that private sector. And the innovation within the private sector is really important. We've seen this across sustainability as well, where we've seen private sectors take on cost and actually innovate when there hasn't been anything set out by the government to do this. And it's been overwhelmingly approached from consumers in a really positive way. So what we can stand to gain from this is we're going to get consumers on board. What we do risk if we don't do this is what we can see is consumers might start to move away, boycott, or be apathetic towards a brand or a company that isn't doing good by society. And that's obviously very bad for us. So I think what we should see more of into the future is that businesses really do need to start to play a role or continue to play a bigger role in terms of the society in which we do business. And of course, as some of the biggest employers within Australia as well, we play this role not only to the people we serve, but also our employees as well, standing up for their rights.
Thanks, Sally.
Thanks, David.
Hi, Sally. Polly here. Great work. Kind of following on from that topic, I was going to ask, so health and wellness is a growing category, and we've seen that sort of also blossom, on quite popular platforms, being, social media platforms of sustainability and green and organic, etc. What do you think it'll take for mental health to become a platform, an open platform of which to kind of drive consumer behaviour, and led or used by retailers and CPG, or will it always be just a byproduct?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really valid question. If I think about the adoption curve and I think sustainability is a great sort of example. If we think about the adoption curve of sustainability, where we're really seeing a lot of momentum behind it, we're seeing a lot of innovation, we're seeing a lot of public discourse around the topic. Within health food, we see this similarly. But as you've mentioned, yes, the mental health aspect is still quite at its infancy. I think a key reason for this has been the stigma involved with mental health. And as we have seen, this is being disbarred, very broadly and widespread. We are seeing a lot of social rise around Me Too movement, the marriage equality, Black Lives Matter, for example. And what this is showing is that consumers are willing to touch these subjects, which historically they have steered away from. Historically, it's been out of the news and it's been, ring-fenced to the edge. So I would expect that this adoption curve of mental health within food and consumer packaged goods is going to dramatically increase in terms of adoption over the next sort of 5-10 years. And I think it's going to be a very steep curve for us to really make sure that we jump on early, and the first movers will get that significant advantage.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Sally. Kathy here. Hey, great job. Very engaging. And look, definitely, love your passion for, being able to create health food for the masses. What do you think are the barriers to doing this, and what do you think are the key enablers?
Thanks, Kathy. So some of the barriers at the moment would be probably within the current structure and setup that we have for producing food. So we know that the processing, for example, is where we actually are adding value through the food chain. And obviously consumers are willing to pay more for convenience. That's not something that has great shelf stable life, etc. We need to keep on innovating back in the processing phase to ensure that we can process healthy foods the way that we are processing other traditionally non-healthy foods as well. We need to ensure that we can get sustainably sourced products. We need to ensure that plantings, for example, of health food trees and vegetables and etc. Proliferate around the world, because these are some of the things we know that we can easily source sugar for a very low dollar per kilo, but we can't do the same for some of these other sweeteners. So we need to ensure that we do encourage farmers, and this could be through a not just brands perspective, but also the government getting on board to support this as well. So see them as being the key crucial enablers. In terms of the barriers to making health food affordable to the masses, that is a great question. So at the moment, I think that is probably one of the also barriers as well. Enabling is getting better R&D and sourcing, and also obviously at the moment, it does act as a bit of a barrier. Also, I would say around the consumer mindset as well. Consumers' tendency to seek out promotions and to research on shelf and find the cheapest option available. This at the moment, with the current supply chain that we have in place for health foods that is rising the cost, is ensuring that these products aren't selling huge volumes of units per store per week. So it does mean that it's putting a lot more pressure on these health foods to try and have great margins for retailers to ensure they stay on shelf, and consumers may not be as willing at the moment to pick it up. When we can get them working together, we're going to see a lot more of growth in this category.
Great, fantastic. Thank you.
Yes.
Hello, Sally, Xavier here. Really well done on your presentation and good composure through the technical difficulties. My question is more about our consumers and shoppers, and understanding what health food is, and are we communicating effectively to them or making it more difficult with some of the changes we're seeing in Coles and Woolworths right now?
Yeah, it's a great question to put the consumers and shoppers at the center of everything that we're doing, right? So I agree that it is through lack of education through schools and families and society, we are left with these questions in terms of what is healthy. We've been told one thing at school and it's different now. The food pyramid's changed. 5 stars, there's a lot of negative news articles about the health star rating as well. Can we trust 5 stars on one thing, and now juice is being, you know, it's now 1 health star rating, for example. So there's a lot of confusion going around. And I probably could link this a little bit to the wine sector. So when we think about the wine sector, we've seen, you know, huge ranging and SKUs, different varietals, different vintages, and typically a very uneducated consumer. So how do we actually signpost stores to ensure that consumers, when they go into store, they know very clearly what they're looking for and where they're looking for it? I think also the advent of more consumers shopping online. We've got Gladys saying, if you can shop online, shop online. This is actually going to allow us to start to educate consumers within the websites. And also when I start to search, for example, high vitamin C, I'll actually now should be able to see a whole proliferation of products that satisfy this trend. So it's signposting and making it easier for consumers to find what they're looking for in a really well signposted and educated way.
Thanks, Sally.
That's right.
Great stuff. Hi, Sally. Great presentation today. There was so many questions I could have asked, but I'm going to ask you a question about the types of health foods. So functional foods are not new. In fact, they've been an aspiration in the industry since I was a food technology student a very long time ago. What are some of the categories or companies that have done a really good job of scaling functional foods to mainstream to deliver on that personal treat occasion you talked about?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So yeah, functional foods and a whole heap of those themes there. The point I was making is that they're not new. They've been around for millennia. And if we do think about innovating into the future, we should be using these pillars and themes to guide us and not the individual fads. I think the example that I gave, which is not within necessarily health food, but of Red Bull, of really dialing up that functional benefits. We know that energy drinks don't appeal to absolutely every single consumer. You know, we've got about 16% penetration within Australia of people who are drinking and consuming energy drinks. But what we have seen is the proliferation of people who are engaging with this brand beyond just their drink and using that brand name as a way of sort of gaining that momentum and pushing that cause. By promoting and supporting a whole heap of athletes, for example. People actually see this as being inspirational, and we know what it stands for, we know its values, and it's mainstreamed this notion of, you know, Red Bull gives you wings, you know, if you drink Red Bull, you're probably, you know, really sporty and etc. like that. So I think that's a great case in point of how do we take this functional benefit and mainstream it across the population, even beyond people who are necessarily seeking that out specifically for themselves.
Great, thank you.
That's okay.
Hi, Sally. Marsha Montebello. Great presentation. Always tough being the last question of the day because everyone kind of steals, you know, points of interest. I think you've made some really great points around taste, and cost is definitely a big thing to think about. You know, some of these solutions are end of the line, and we know that mental health doesn't discriminate between people's age or wallet accessibility. What do you think are the other things CPG companies can do to address making these products available to everyone, and also address that fact that a lot of the adoption is because consumers just don't know how to integrate healthy foods into their regular diet? So what are the things you think they can do to help overcome one of those barriers?
Sure, thanks, Marsha. For brands specifically, I would say that, first of all, it's communicating that key message of what your brand stands for to the consumers and having it available when they are seeking this. So I don't just think that it's the job of being in store and acting as inspiration when you're walking down the aisle. It's how you're engaging with people online, in social media settings, for example, where you're actually finding content that's relevant to what you're feeling, your emotions, And then you can actually see people who are saying, you know, this is actually helping me. Having a healthy diet is actually helping me through this time. Yes, it's lockdown, but here is some inspiration in terms of what we can cook for ourselves and our family. And it's keeping that conversation going with the consumers to ensure that we are educating them just as much around the occasions that you could be eating this type of health food. And once again, I've mentioned the sharing occasion number of times. I found it really hard beyond just a few of the salty snacks aisle examples, finding health foods that are in a platter or a sharing pack. So I couldn't put any on the presentation itself because at the moment it's really hard to find that, right? So there's one thing about consumers' knowledge, awareness, being there when a consumer's seeking you, but there's another thing about innovating and getting there for more occasions to satisfy across more occasions for consumers as well. So I would say that would be the two things: innovation for new occasions, and also being there when consumers are seeking inspiration and looking for you.
Beautiful. Thanks, Sally.
Hi, Sally. Sorry, you've got one final question. It's Nigel here. Well done on your presentation. Great topic, really engaging. My question is, when we look at smoking and how long it took people's perception to change regarding that, how do we speed up that process based on the sort of epidemic we've got at the moment with mental health?
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. I think the environment was very different when we were working through figuring out smoking is horrendous for us. So initially it was sort of marketed to as being very healthy, for example, and we had scientists backing this up, and we had advertisers saying, you know, light up a cigarette every hour, it's perfect for every occasion. And we're just not seeing that now with mental health. We're not hearing that people are, you know, close the door behind you, I don't want to hear about it. What we're seeing is it thrust into the media now. So I think if we consider smoking as an example where it's taken decades and really ingrained behaviors and also addictive behaviors as well. So this is something that we're not only struggling with in terms of people breaking, you know, thinking that it's wrong for us, but a whole heap of people are smoking cigarettes knowing that they shouldn't, knowing that they don't want to, whereas that won't be the case for health foods. We're going to be able to get health foods into more shoppers' baskets, eating them across more occasions. And once they do start, they're going to feel those benefits and feel good impacts across themselves, both mentally and also physically. And I think that's going to encourage adoption a lot faster than we saw the de-adoption of tobacco and cigarettes. I hope that helps answer that question, Nigel.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sally, it's Bernie again. Firstly, you can relax now, all finished. Job well done. We look forward to seeing you at 5 o'clock, where we'll announce the winner and congratulate you once again. But well done today, and really appreciate the presentation. Thanks a lot.
Great to have you guys. See you later.